interview to spotlight on health, the tipping point, diet, and climate chaos, sponsored by the Colin Campbell Center for Nutrition Studies. My name is Natasha Lance, and I am the COO of CNS. And I'm going to go over just a few very basic housekeeping details for our session this evening, and then I will be introducing our moderator. So for those of you who would like to ask our panelists questions this evening, please drop your questions in the chat. We will gather those and we will ask those questions at the end. For those of you who need closed captioning, please go to the bottom of your Zoom screen and select CC, and that will turn on the closed captioning for you. For those of you who are interested in getting the replay of this, it will come to you via email if you are a registered participant, and it will come into your inbox by next Wednesday. And just so you know, you may need to check your spam folder because sometimes it ends up there. So that is all the housekeeping details for this evening. If you have questions, ask them in the chat. I will be there answering questions and helping to assist. Without further ado, let me introduce you to Dr. Michael Hawley. Dr. Michael Hawley is the chairperson of the Medical Advisory Board for the Center for Nutrition Studies. He is our facilitator and host this evening, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Natasha, and welcome everyone from across the United States and around the world. We're so glad you've chosen to join us tonight. We have three expert panelists that are going to walk us through this tipping point, diet and climate chaos. Let me take a moment to read the bios of our three expert panelists. Our first, Colin Campbell, PhD. He has completed his education at Cornell University, getting a master's and PhD there. He also was at MIT as a research associate in nutrition, biochemistry, and toxicology. He is the Jacob Gould Sherman Professor Emeritus of Nutritional Biochemistry in the Division of Nutritional Sciences at Cornell. His research experience includes both laboratory experiments and large-scale human studies. He has received over 70 grant years of peer-reviewed research funding, mostly from NIH. And he's served on grant review panels of multiple funding agencies, actively participated in the development of national and international nutrition policy, and authored over 350 research papers, most published in peer-reviewed science journals. He is the author of several books, including The China Study, one of the most widely read and impactful books about nutrition and health in the 21st century. Welcome, Colin.
Thank you.
J. Morris Hicks, a former engineer, process improvement consultant, and senior corporate executive for over 30 years. Jim Hicks has always focused on the big picture when analyzing any issue. In 2002, after becoming curious about the optimal diet for humans, he began a comprehensive study of what we eat from a global perspective, discovering many startling issues and opportunities along the way. His long-term vision began emerging in three books that he has authored since 2011. The first was Healthy Eating, Healthy World, which was followed in 2015 by the Four-Leaf Guide to Vibrant Health that he co-authored with a medical doctor. Then in 2020, he published Outcry, Urgent Alarms from Our Planet and What We Can Do About Them. Since then, Jim's work has primarily been aimed at waking up the leaders of the world to the fact that animal agriculture is the leading driver of climate change, and that it is the only driver that can easily be disabled by individual citizens who simply begin choosing plant-based foods that promote both physical and environmental health. In that ongoing effort, he has posted over 1,400 health and sustainability articles at hpjmh.com, and we're going to post that in the chat so you don't have to memorize that website, as he strives to promote health, hope, and harmony on planet Earth. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you.
Stephen Disla started working at the Center for Nutrition Studies in 2020 as an instructional designer for the Food and Sustainability Certificate Program. His educational background is in mass communication and international studies. As an instructional designer, he played a leading role in outlining the certificate and collaborating with the leading experts showcased in the program. Additionally, he helped as a grant reviewer for the Whole Community Grant Program and has written several articles which can be found on the CNS website under the environmental category. Most recently, he helped write a position paper outlining an exciting and new collaborative effort between CNS and the Races Institute, an initiative that aims to address some of the critical topics covered in the sustainability certificate through adopting whole food, plant-based agriculture to curtail climate change and the ongoing mass extinction. Since helping complete the certificate, Stephen has become more involved with the practical hands-on applications of topics from the course. He is certified as a soil food web lab technician, working with microscopy to evaluate soil biology. And additionally, he runs a burgeoning plant nursery in North Carolina where he's growing fruit trees, nuts, and herbaceous perennials. Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you.
You know, the United Nations Environment Program expert panel, they concluded that two activities have disproportionately a large effect on the planet's life support systems. You can guess what those are. Animal agriculture, especially raising livestock for meat and dairy, and the use for fossil fuels. They further concluded that a global shift towards a vegan diet is vital to save the world from hunger, fuel poverty, and the worst impacts of climate change. So I want to open by asking Jim and Stephen to define the problem as that pertains to the natural environment, how you two see that. Jim, you go first, and then Stephen after that, please.
Okay, thank you, Mike. I came up with 8 bullet points to describe the problem that humanity faces. Let's begin with my own awakening. 20 years ago, before meeting Colin Campbell, I had what I now call my blinding flash of the obvious. After 6 months of searching for the optimal diet for humans, I exclaimed to myself in May of 2003, "Oh my God, we're eating the wrong food for our species." At that time, Colin had played a huge role in my search for the truth. I have 8 points to go over. 1, my simple description of the huge problem. Being an engineer, I like to use numbers that make the problem as simple as possible. Here's an example. Early into my search, I found that on average, on a per calorie basis, animal-based foods require over 10 times as much land, water, and energy as do plant-based foods. That helps get that point across very easily that everyone can understand. Point number 2, animal-based foods are driving big problems. We know from that reckless use of finite natural resources that our love affair with animal-based foods is taking its toll on water reserves, arable land, deforestation, topsoil loss, biodiversity loss, species extinction, climate change, and more. Point 3, things are still getting steadily worse. In a chart that I posted this morning in my SOS memo, it revealed that in just the past 30 years, the global production of meat has doubled, rising from 150 million tons per year in 1990 to over 300 million tons in 2020. Point 4, animal-based foods are not good for our health. All of the above would suggest that we must truly need animal-based foods for our health. We don't. In fact, it's just the opposite. We know from Dr. Campbell and scores of pioneering medical doctors that we can actually reverse most chronic diseases simply by eating a whole food plant-based diet. Point 5, now for the worst news of all, the USDA, U.S. Department of Education, and many other authorities are not telling us the truth. In short, as Colin and I have found, they have been bought and paid for by the mighty meat, dairy, and egg, poultry, and fish businesses. And they've been doing this for so long that they themselves actually believe wholeheartedly that they are right. I believe that's the case, actually. Point 6, a missed opportunity of epic proportions. Almost 40 years ago, Dr. T. Colin Campbell and a host of prominent MDs had proven scientifically and clinically that animal protein promotes cancer, while a diet of mostly whole plant-based foods can prevent or reverse most chronic diseases, including cancer. Had the world listened to the science in 1980, it is quite possible that climate change may have never been tamed, may have been tamed, excuse me, long before we even knew it was a problem. If we had totally changed our diet, we would have eliminated the number one driver of climate change long before we even knew it was a problem, but that did not happen. Point 7, now in 2023, we have a world full of leaders and experts who have embraced the wrong so-called truths about the most important facts. Our governments, elected officials, educational institutions, healthcare system, client scientists, etc. This has been going on for so long that it's as if they have all concluded that they know the true facts on these topics, and that people like the ones on this webinar tonight are the lunatic fringe. Number 8, final point, we know that the real truth is on our side. And I believe that we now have at least one remaining option for awakening the world to that truth. That option is the fourth estate or the global media. We can talk about my thoughts on that topic when we get to the solutions part of this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Stephen, how do you see this problem from your point of view?
So fundamentally, when I look at this, I think of it in terms of a land use issue. So on the one hand, we have almost half of all arable land globally is used for agriculture in one way or another. So that means taken from a wild state and transformed for our needs to grow food. And then you look a little bit further into that and you see that 77% of all that land is used for livestock today. And that in turn only equates to 18% of global calories. So it's a really glaring inefficiency that I think is connected to climate change, biodiversity loss, and all these issues across the board. So when I think about it, it's more as a land use issue.
Yeah, that leads into my next comments. Globally, there has been a roughly 68% reduction of all biodiversity in less than 50 years. And this is, by the way, this is from an article that Stephen wrote. This is catastrophic decline with potentially huge ramifications. And for those that may not be familiar with the term biodiversity, it's short for biological diversity, the variety of all living things and their interactions. Furthermore, for this same article that Stephen wrote, the United Nations Biodiversity Summit, known as COP15, ended in December 2022 with nearly 200 participant nations pledging to protect at least 30% of the Earth's land and oceans for wildlife by 2030. That's just down around the corner. This commitment is part of an effort to combat ongoing biodiversity crisis, which has led many to conclude we are currently entering and experiencing Earth's sixth mass extinction event. I would like our panelists to comment on the implications, as Stephen has mentioned, for land use and the impacts on biodiversity, inefficient livestock production versus plant-based systems, and the implications for how we've altered the planet.
You want to take that, Colin?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many figures and thoughts essentially that, circulate around that same point. I mean, we use our land to produce what we eat, namely livestock. And I think the figure that Stephen just threw out there just a moment ago shows how lopsided that is. And in fact, when we do that, we're eating a food we don't need. And we're eating a food that elevates the healthcare costs in our society enormously. And so it really has a big impact on many aspects of our lives. I first actually sort of became somewhat acquainted to this. I was from the farm to begin with, but was in graduate school when I was we were all asked to give a introductory seminar on the issue concerning livestock and stuff like that. And I rather crazily and picked up this paper written about 1924 by a gentleman from Denmark by the name of Henty, who was arguing at that time exactly the same points we're making now. I found it really interesting, and I was in a department of animal science at that time. And the reason I'm telling you this story because I thought it was kind of fun, and I was nervous, as any new graduate student would be. And my professor called me aside. He told me, he said, "I don't think that was a very good choice you made." That was in 1958, based on a paper that was published in, as I say, in 1924. So I've been very much aware, of this issue for quite a long time, and disappointed, I should say, and other people not hear anything about it. And just I think that there's the last 10, 15 years or so, it's kind of come up. And so, yeah, I think this discordance between the food we eat, and the effect it has on the environment on one hand, and it's not improving our health on the other. I mean, they're just, it's inextricably linked. And there's no way to get around it. And furthermore, eating the right food affects many different aspects of the environment. So I don't know, I get really excited about that bridge between, on the one hand, the problem, not only the environment, but also culture, healthcare, and what we know in science. It's right there, it's glaring. And one of the things I just get excited about, worried about too, is how do we communicate this to the public? And I see the guys that we have here. I just got a note handed to me to get on to the point. In any case, it's such a big topic. And I could go on some more. I'll save some of my remarks for a little bit later. I'm anxious to hear what these other guys are saying.
Yeah, Jim, Stephen, what are your comments?
I wanted to mention the facts that are out there in terms of research papers which determine or have reported what portion of climate change is driven by animal agriculture. I happen to know the two authors of two of the papers. One is Jeff Anhang and Robert Goodwin wrote the World Bank paper back in 2009, and they concluded that over at least 51% of all climate change was driven by animal agriculture. And these guys are with the World Bank, highly scrutinized. And that made some waves, but really never got accepted. I've gotten to know Jeff Anhang since then. Unfortunately, Robert Goodwin passed away. And then 10 years later, in 2019, a good friend and colleague of mine, Dr. Silas Rao, a Stanford PhD in electrical engineering, and one of the inventors of the internet, was actually working with Al Gore on climate change issues, and back in the early 2000s until he resigned from that staff because Al Gore refused to really talk about the leading driver of climate change, and that's because it would not be good for his popularity in the world. So to me, if you're we know that animal agriculture is an extremely large driver of climate change. And whether you believe that it's 51% or 87%, as Silas Rao has concluded, even no matter who you look at it, it's the only driver of climate change that can be totally eliminated. And it's the only driver of climate change that individual citizens all over the world can take part in reducing it. The question is, how are we going to get the message to the 5 or 6 billion people who are eating animal-based foods?
Yeah. Stephen, anything to add?
Yeah, so I think with the land use issues, like I brought up earlier, we could transition to a plant-based diet fully, and we could conserve that 30% of the habitable land tomorrow if we transitioned. But I think that there's a big hesitation to take food or take land out of agricultural production that is used for livestock, with this the misunderstanding of animal protein as being necessary for our health. And I think a lot of organizations have hesitated to even entertain the idea of taking that land and transitioning it to a plant-based system or a more conservation. I think that's why it's so important to have these discussions tying in nutrition and tying in, the whole image together.
Excellent. Yeah.
I'd have to add a quick comment here. That's why you're on this program, Stephen. You represent the community, in my view, and I think my colleagues will agree to that. You represent the community that really has some time to really make this point. And it's really quite a delight to see that amongst us, here on the face of this planet, young people really taking this quite seriously.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important point. And one of the reasons I was very anxious to have you here, because you're representing that community with many years to go. So
Exactly. Yeah. So agriculture, as you all mentioned, occupies 50% of all habitable land around the world. Of that 51 million square kilometers used for agriculture, you can guess a very high percentage, 77%, is for production of livestock, with the remainder occupied by crops grown for direct human consumption. So I'd like you all to comment further on the importance of connecting, and this is what Colin was talking about, and Stephen too, importance of connecting nutrition and health to these environmental issues, thinking more holistically with a W, holistically about food, and not losing sight of the forest for the trees. It becomes a lot harder to justify livestock production and the regenerative livestock movement, especially in comparison to plant-based alternatives, when taking into account the health implications. So why are so many focused on only one piece of this puzzle?
I'm anxious to hear the answer to that question myself.
Stephen?
Comment on
Okay, Jim, yeah.
one piece of the puzzle. You mentioned all of the land that's being used for animal agriculture. 10,000 years ago, most of that land was forest. And at one time, there were 6 trillion trees on this planet. And there are now, according to Dr. Silas Rao, who I think is an extremely good engineer and factual individual, fact-based individual, he reports that there are now 3 trillion trees. We have wiped out 3 trillion trees. And according to his research, if those trees had never been wiped out, we would not be in the shape we're in now when it comes to climate change. But that's just one small piece of what can happen when we stop producing the animals. We can start rewilding and bringing back those trees. This is a topic that none of the top climate change experts ever mention. It's just a tragedy because it's the single most important thing. It's the single biggest driver of climate change is the loss of the ability of those trees to absorb all of that CO2. And the public is just totally not being told the truth about that key fact.
Stephen,
Yeah, I think
you look like you want to say something. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think that a lot of these organizations and people who focus on environmental issues, without knowing the information about nutrition and health, they're not going to want to sacrifice, food that people need to eat, obviously, and they're not going to want to sacrifice that for environmental reasons, and they're not going to talk about it. But it's when you start connecting the nutrition to it that you see that there are these enormous potentials of rewilding 30% of all habitable land. This is an enormous solution, and it could really make a huge difference. But it's not going to be talked about until these nutritional impacts are also brought into the discussion.
Yeah.
One of the issues, I think quickly, I know we all agree to this, and everyone else does too. The existing system we have now is closely intertwined with our interest in economics. We make money on these ideas that we live with. That's pretty natural. And so the difficulty that I actually see is how can we sort of move from this place where this supports the current system we have now, supports labor, it supports the sale of products. I mean, this is our economic system. And so we're facing that proposition. How can we come up with some kind of transition, at least, to sort of take advantage of that fact and deal with it? And let me throw something out here. One thing, I don't want to take all the time up to this thing, but I think in terms of motivating people, and I think we've all thought about this, and our colleagues have too, of all the things that we can say, I think, that's my bias, if we talk about the health that we experience from the kind of food we now eat, and come to recognize the kind of health that we're losing, that we can achieve if we just eat the right food. It just turns out the answer to that question is also an answer to the question we're talking about here as far as the environment is concerned. And so I'm biased in that case, I guess, but I really think that that's a motivating point of view, that if you can really get people to understand, the kind of health that they can achieve, not getting now. And of course, that involves a lot of colleagues in medicine and, the health sector. And I don't know what we do with the question concerning how do you rewire the whole thing so people can have jobs. That's one of the questions that we've got to face too. But
Right. Many have made this concerted effort to brand free-range livestock as more healthful and sustainable. But I would like you panelists to comment on why this is not the answer from the perspective of our planet and our health. So I'll ask Jim and Stephen to maybe comment on the planet part of that question, and then Colin, I would like you to talk about the health part of that.
Yeah, I can jump in there. There was a study recently that came out, and they showed that the free-range livestock, they're able to achieve a reduction in CO2 emissions by 66%. But the trade-off of this was that the required land use requirements for that would be 2.5 times larger, 2.5 times larger than what is currently used. And as we've been talking about the land use issues, there's just simply not enough land for this. And a 66% reduction is something, but it could be a complete reduction and a reforestation of all this land that's inefficiently used. So there's kind of two sides to that as a solution.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Jim?
What was the question?
Why free-range livestock is not the answer for our planet?
Yeah. Well, obviously, this group knows that we don't need to be eating any livestock, and trees can't grow where livestock are grazing. I mean, there might be a few trees here and there, but you can't have a forest with a bunch of cows and chickens and pigs running around. But the elephant in the room is the belief, the true belief. I think it's taught in schools. It's all of the schools in America, public schools have have milk posters on the wall. I mean, we have an entire system. In our country, we've got 330 million people, and 310 million or 20 million of those people truly believe they need to have animal protein to be healthy. I think most of the scientists believe that. I think most of the public believes that. And, you know, we've had a few documentaries that have been featuring Colin Campbell's work and other works, and they've been outstanding, but the word is just not getting out there. It's not getting out there fast enough. And we are running out of time. I mean, the figures coming in now on climate change are just getting worse and worse, particularly this year with the El Nino. Things are moving a lot more rapidly than we realized. And I think eventually we have to figure out a way to take the knowledge of the truth directly to the American people, or the global people. And I think, you know, to get that done is going to require a real big effort by the global media. And to get that done requires one or two leaders. And that is not happening right now at all. I believe it is possible, and I believe it might be the only thing that's going to get us through this, because we're simply not getting, I mean, the data I quoted earlier, we have doubled the amount of production of meat in the past 30 years, doubled on the planet, and the population hadn't gone up by double in the past 30 years. So, you know, obviously a lot more people are eating more meat and dairy than ever before. And we've got to figure out a way to get that message to the public and make that change.
Good.
Hey,
Colin?
Jim, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Colin, what do you have?
Yeah, I want to bring to Jim's attention, because I think you were in that meeting at the time. We and about 20 others, I guess, were meeting privately with Jim Cameron in his home, the guy that wrote did the film Titanic, and he really got interested in this, thankfully. But there was one gentleman there, was the NRDC, I think, Jim, is that what the organization is? Remember the guy that was there running the NRDC, the one that was raising the most money for environmental studies and that sort of thing, supposedly?
Was it one from the green, one of the green organizations?
Yeah, I don't know. It's the biggest environmental group in terms of getting into the economic space. But in any case, I remember Jim asking him, why don't you put, when you're out raising all this money, why don't you put a word in there about nutrition? And I remember his reply. You probably do too.
Yeah.
He said, if I did that, he said, I'd lose all of my donors.
Yeah.
But it stuck with me. I
Yeah,
mean,
that guy was with the Environmental Defense Fund.
yeah, that's right.
He was one of the top people. He was a former managing editor of Fortune magazine. Very, very high, highly educated, highly influential guy. Actually, I flew home with him after that conference, and we were on the same plane, and he followed my work for the next 10 years. And yet he has never come out and admitted what he said in that room in public. And I guess he got tired of hearing me talk about it in my work. I never really heard from him, but I did notice that he was opening my weekly memos, et cetera. And I noticed about a year ago, he finally unsubscribed. He got tired of hearing the truth, probably embarrassed that he can't come out and because of his business can't admit what the leading driver of climate change is. It is just, how could you look at yourself in the mirror and know what we're leaving for our children and grandchildren if we could possibly change it?
Colin, could you repeat what he said? I want to make sure that everybody heard that.
Yes, correct me, Jim, if I'm saying it wrong, but basically, Jim Cameron asked him, we were all talking about environmental issues and food and so forth, and Cameron had an interest in that too. And he asked this fellow, who was raised the most funding of anyone in the business, why don't you tell your clientele about nutrition? And he said, if I did that, he said, I'd lose them all.
Hmm.
In other words, the people in the donor business, I don't know what he was talking about. I don't know the breakdown of what specifically kind of people he's talking about, but in any case, he said that. It stuck with me.
Yeah.
Because I've spoken to a number of from the Sierra Club and EPA and so forth like that, and I'm always told to motivate these people. And I don't know how to motivate, because the reason they asked me to make some comment about that, because it's hard to get the people interested in the environment to recognize that the number one driver of the whole issue is the food we eat, the choices we make. I mean, I don't know how far I can go with that.
I remember that vividly, and I've repeated that conversation so many times, I can't believe it. I was sitting right next to James Cameron when he had the two of the guys. One was from the Environmental Defense, and the other from one of the other green organizations was the CEO. And he asked both of them, he said, I've been on your websites. I can't find a single word about the animal agriculture influence on climate change. And that's when they sheepishly kind of agreed that it would destroy their fundraising.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, where are they today? They got a lot of fundraising, but meanwhile, we've got what I call 6 grossly unsustainable solutions. 1, overpopulation, and we're adding a net 6 million people every month. 2, millions of new meat eaters every month. 3, never-ending growth economy, capitalism. 4, the wasteful way we live in the developed world. 5, a snail pace movement to a vegan world. A lot of people are talking about it, but I saw a stat the other day that said there are more ex-vegans in New York than there are vegans. Think about that, more ex-vegans. We have not made it a real happy experience to be a vegan. You get one thing on every menu, and so people just give it up after a while. But they don't learn about the whole food plant-based diet and reversing chronic disease. They just hear about vegan, and not many people really want to be a vegan. And then we have an absence of responsible global leadership. So I keep harping on the same thing. I'm 99% certain there's only one global action that can possibly buy us enough time to address and resolve all of those 6 situations listed above. Eliminate agriculture globally, animal agriculture globally by 2030. But to your point, Mike, just doing some regenerative agriculture, moving cows around from lot to lot. First of all, they don't tell people that they could never make that much beef on that amount of land, reduced amount of land.
Right.
Very inefficient. It would cost a lot of money. It's just people holding on to the belief that we want to keep eating animals, and we'll make it green. We'll tell a green story about it, but it's just not happening.
Right. Right.
I say here, Stephen.
Yeah, so I have a specific question for Stephen, and actually I'll let you two comment after Stephen does. And we have I want you to comment, Stephen, what you notice with generational attitudes about food and impacts on health and environment, because you are the youngest person on this panel, and I just want to hear from you what you notice in your generation, and how is it, similar or different to what we're talking about?
Yeah, a lot of people I know that would decided to go plant-based have done so for environmental reasons amongst the younger people that I know that have made that transition. And I think that, the health message is, it reaches, older generations a little more than the younger generation. So I think that, a lot of, the inefficiencies are so obvious, and they're so laid bare, that I think that a lot of the younger people are now thinking about their future and thinking about how to lessen their environmental impact. And I think food choices is, the most obvious and easy one to do. And I think also a lot of these fake meat brands are coming out now and making it a little bit easier for people to still have that connection to the food that they, like and have had for a long time, and still feel a little bit better about that.
Stephen, I have to tell you that you and I haven't talked about this, but some of the fake meats people, as you know, are producing this so-called fake meat in big vats and glass this and glass that vessels, and they're using the messenger of RNA, which is the substance that creates and synthesizes protein according to the template of DNA. But in any case, they're using messenger RNA, putting these vats, and then working in such a way they produce a lot of protein. Do you know, I haven't heard them talk about this, and I'm going to have to talk to some of these folks. When that RNA, it will come from a chicken breast or, pig's backside or whatever, whatever kind of meat people like to eat, that RNA is going to be producing exactly the same protein, that grows on the animal. And that's what causes increases in cholesterol. That's what causes increases in cancer growth, the whole 9 yards. So there, on one hand, yeah, you can argue that it's easier to get that material, but putting it in a glass vessel and maybe saving some animals that way, but we're going to end up with the same product, which brings me to a point I'd like to emphasize. And that the one argument, nutritionally speaking, or scientifically, I would say is at the top of my list in conveying the message. We don't need animal protein. Plants have all the protein we need, period. And if one goes back and traces that history, especially the last century or so, we got loads of data to show as animal protein diets, animal protein increases in the diets, plant food goes down because there's a set amount of calories. One goes up, they produce the same result. And I guess I've data now work of others in the last half a century, 75 years, where people have published those kinds of charts and they never get noticed. The information against animal-based protein, whether it's coming out of a vat or whether it's coming out of a livestock yard, we get the same product that causes the same health problems. So we got to somehow get off the notion that we actually need all that protein. It's crazy.
Stephen, what do you hear from your generation about what your grandfather's saying? Obviously you said that they are more oriented to the environmental impacts. The health is maybe secondary or tertiary even, but what do you hear from your generation, so to speak?
As far as health?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. I think a lot of the friends that I have that, do plant-based, I think a lot of them have approached it from an environmental point of view and then come and stepped into the health and realized and learned more about that as an avenue for learning about that. In the same way, I think a lot of people learn about the health impacts and then learn consequently about the environmental impacts. So, kind of one is like a gateway to another in a way.
Yeah, excellent point. Yes. Yeah. Jim, any comments on this?
I was actually looking ahead toward my favorite topic on this thing, which is leadership or the lack thereof. I have a slide that I use in my presentations. I have pictures of 8 prominent men on the world stage: Al Gore, Joe Biden, John Kerry, King Charles, Bill Gates, Paul Hawken, Bill McKibben, and Antonio Guterres of the UN. I've never heard any of these men ever mention the leading driver of climate change. Even Al Gore, he may be the only one of that group that really knows what the leading driver is, but he no longer admits it because it wouldn't be popular on the world stage. I doubt that most of those men really know it. I mean, we've kept this information pretty secret. It's surprising that somebody like Guterres wouldn't know, but yet you look at the bureaucracy involved with the United Nations and the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, and we're not getting the information out there, and these top environmentalists are just not talking about the leading driver of climate change. And that's kind of like, to me, the elephant in the room. We got to talk about it.
Right, right. So with the time that we have remaining, what I want to do is one more question for the three of you, and then I will ask you each to have your final thoughts and comments. So the question, and this is the one that we really need to talk about, is how we might encourage more concrete action on transitioning towards plant-based agricultural systems. Talking about these issues and raising awareness is great, but how can we take the next step and start thinking more about tangible demonstrations and models of these ideas, working with current economic structures and incentives? Difficult question, but this is the what can we do? What are the solutions? And whoever wants to take a stab at it first, and then I'd like really all three of you to comment.
Yeah, I can go ahead. I think that there should be there should be more of a concerted effort to helping, a lot of livestock farmers, they're really struggling. They're not, making ends meet at the current system. There's so much consolidation and so much pressure put on farmers that, they're struggling in a lot of ways also. So we have to really have a concerted effort into helping farmers transition towards plant-based in more concrete ways. I think there's some cool organizations working with farmers directly to, help them make that transition, and in the process, have an economic stream of income that is actually sustainable and viable. So, it's going to be a huge undertaking, but we also have to, value conservation properly and value the wild, wild environments.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, working with the farmers, because they have, they want to make a living. And if we don't help them with this transition, it's not going to get done. Yeah. Colin?
Well, I'll put a plug in for the medical community too, of which you are an outstanding example in conveying information. You tell a really nice story to help people can, get balance that way. Somehow we've really got to focus on that question. People are influenced if they are convinced. I think they're influenced to make these changes in their choices if they know it's going to, the present system is going to kill them 4 times faster than what we're talking about.
Right.
And
Right.
If we could just have more communicators like you, Mike, around tell that story, that's part of it. Personal health, we all know that personal health is personal, and so we got to find ways to really talk about it in a sense that is meaningful for people to cause them to change. We know that's a difficult pathway, but nonetheless, personal health is one key to sort of start talking about, let's say, change when your life and your money, you're spending the rest of your life. Older people, they're bankruptcies right now. I understand. I don't know what the latest figures are, but I'm told that at the older ages, like 40% of family bankruptcies are medically related.
Yes, right.
You know that story, I'm sure, very well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, anyhow, I get carried away with the protein thing, but partly because I was raised on a farm raising protein, and I did my research promoting it, and I was kind of shocked to see what I saw. And so I walked down that path and saw the treacherous way it is. But
Yeah, and you made a U-turn.
yeah, but this issue of economics and making sure, that the people they're supposedly going to lose their jobs, we got to find some way for that argument, that economic argument, to transition in a way which everyone can benefit.
Yeah, yeah. Jim, you've written a lot about solutions and things. So I'm interested to hear what you have to say.
Well, I think the beauty of the situation is its in simplicity. I think the food we manufacture and distribute it are are exactly the foods that the people want. And what we have to do is real simple. We just have to educate the public enough so that it's a blinding flash of the obvious that they should be eating plants. And we have to do that quickly because we are running out of time. And I've got an idea that I want to share toward the end in my wrap up, but it's all about educating the public in such a manner that we bypass all of the industry. We're talking about employing the global media to really start telling the hardcore truth about the fact that we've been lied to by our governments and our schools of nutrition and the entire industrial complex is all about making money. And there's a lot of money invested in animal agriculture. A lot of players stand to lose a lot of money if it goes down. And so to me, it's a simple case of personal choice. We just have to educate the public enough. And I believe with the right team of leaders doing that, we could get a lot of traction working with prominent people in the global media sector.
Good points. Thank you, Jim. So we have enough time for each of you to wrap it up. Your final thoughts and comments, take 2 to 3 minutes each. I'm going to start with the youngest and work our way over. So Stephen, and then Jim, and then Colin, you'll have the last word. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah. So I was just going to say, I think there will be a time in the future where we look back on this and how we've misutilized all our resources to this point of, climate chaos and mass extinction. And we will just look at and say, the gluttony, how could we have been so wasteful with everything? And I think that will come. The question is, at what point will that come? I think there will be a paradigm shift at some point, but at the same time, I think, just because we transition to plant-based systems too, that doesn't mean that what comes to replace these, agricultural systems will be anything less destructive. They could be replaced with biofuels or something like that. So I think that we have to really think about this in a whole systems kind of way, and holistically, and thinking through not just individual parts, but how can we tie all these issues together and make sure that what replaces this system is actually sustainable and regenerative. And also, I think that these conversations like this are great too, connecting diet, nutrition to these environmental issues and thinking through holistically and not breaking it down. I think also we're gonna have to create partnerships, and we're gonna have to really work together to make sure that these messages are heard and connected. And I think that I'm really excited actually. CNS is putting together a white paper, a position paper that is coming out soon. It should be online shortly, outlining a collaboration between CNS and organization of Dominican Republic. I'm really excited to have that come out shortly, so keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, I've had a preview of that project, Stephen. It's going to be amazing. I think our audience will be really glad and to see some concrete action taking place. So we'll look forward to that in the future. Jim, your final thoughts.
Yes, I have an envisioned solution that I have been writing about quite a bit, and it involves the current mayor of New York City, who unfortunately has not been blessed with any good news here lately about some various factors, has got nothing to do with diet or healthcare or anything like that. But he is the mayor of New York City, and New York City is arguably the most influential city in the world. And I believe that if we could get 1 hour of his time, I've already written a speech for him to give during that 1 hour, that we have Colin Campbell, will be heading up our list of people that will be there. And he knows who Mayor Adams knows who Colin Campbell is, because he reversed his own type 2 diabetes and blindness. He knows all about Campbell. He knows all about Esselstyn. So I believe that we could take 1 hour of Mayor Adams' time. One of the guests that he would invite would be a notable, highly respected member of the media. I've been using the name Katie Couric because she's an independent journalist, yet she's internationally known, and she's known for always following her heart and her gut. Now, I think if we get 6 of us in the room with Mayor Adams introducing it, he could leave after 1 hour. The rest of us could spend several hours there. And the rest of us include T. Colin Campbell, also Michelle McMacken. Dr. Michelle McMacken already works for the mayor, and she has experience in reversing disease. She could be in that meeting. Silas Rao, Dr. Silas Rao also has a connection with Mayor Adams' office. And he wrote the paper about climate change and the fact that animal agriculture is responsible for 87% of it. And then there's a Princeton climate scientist, retired, a meteorologist named Dr. Abraham Ort, and he's agreed to be in that meeting. So with a pretty small meeting of people, Katie Couric could listen to the facts as they will outline them, and she will be able to connect the dots, and we may spend 2 hours with her that day or 4 hours. But once we get another appointment with her and she starts where she understands the big picture as well as all of us do on this screen and many of the people listening, she will know what to do with that news. And she will know that, oh my God, if people just knew what you're telling me, and she would have to first verify that all of this is true. But with Mayor Adams having those people in his office, I think, and the integrity of Colin Campbell would shine through, along with Dr. Silas Rao and Michelle McMacken. And Katie could realize, why has she never heard this before? You know, that's what everybody always asks, is why have we never heard this before? Not only is what we eat the leading driver of what makes us sick, but it's the leading driver of climate change. And I don't believe we're going to solve climate change without a change in choices of food by individual citizens all over the world. And I think Katie could get that ball rolling. Is that 3 minutes?
Jim. Yeah. That's your 3 minutes, right. Colin, wrap this up for us.
Well, thank you for setting me up, Jim, on that point. But, my favorite topic, as all of you know, really is the basic science of nutrition, if you will. And the one driver of choices, food choices through the years, decades, more than a century, the one driver, without a doubt, is our reverence for protein. And for 90% of the people, maybe 95% of the people or more, what people tend to think about, just in the public, when it comes to questions concerning protein, they know they need it. It's the most important nutrient, and it's generally considered the stuff that comes out of animal food. Not realizing that, the plants have all the protein we need, and we're healthier for it. This is an amazing thing. And so I've developed some arguments, if you will, and charts and stuff like that I've been just talking about recently, that, it could be, it's a contentious issue. I have to tell you, I know firsthand, really, really contentious. People want to believe that we have a right to eat all that good protein. Always been. And then societies, as soon as they get enough money to move in that direction, the more economically challenged countries, that's where they want to go. Right now, China is the number one, I think is already now the number one consumer, or at least the rate of increase in animal food consumption is coming from China. I'm sorry to say, I mean, we did our work there, and I talked to some of the people who were, at the head of that movement, and it's funny, it comes in the human brain, whether it's in Asia or wherever, that somehow we have a right and we have a need to eat that protein. That's the most valuable thing of all. And so, I just, and I think I could show some data that's actually been kind of hidden away. The public really haven't seen it. And some arguments about how it works together with the plants to create a response that's second to none. And if I think people start thinking about, gosh, this is my life. Do I want to, knock off 10, 15, 20 years of the end of my life, eat the wrong food? No. So I want to just put a plug for the whole concept of let's teach nutrition the right way and let them see what can happen to them if they don't do it the right way. And then that translates into climate change.
Excellent. Well, you all have done a fabulous job tonight addressing a extremely important topic, one that to solve it, it's going to be multiple aspects of public policy and economics and education, as you all mentioned. When Stephen was giving his summary comment, it signaled something in my brain in a quote, and I found it. It was Dr. Albert Schweitzer, Nobel Peace Prize winner in 1952. He said, and this is almost exactly what Stephen said, the time is coming when people will be amazed that the human race existed so long before it recognized that thoughtless injury to life is incompatible with real ethics. I mean, that's basically what Stephen said. And, so you're right there with Albert Schweitzer, Stephen. So, yeah. So Natasha, so you have some questions that have been accumulating. Can you share some of those with us? And our panel
I sure can
answer them.
Thank you so much to everyone. A very lively chat session that is continuing to go on. Lots of resource sharing, lots of deep discussion. A lot of the questions fell into two very distinct areas. One of those was more along the lines of how do you help the individual change their belief system about food and adopt a new way of eating? And then how do you get our change makers, our lawmakers, the governments, those kinds of things in line to make changes? There was one first question that I would like to ask before we dive into those two areas. And this one is from Isabella in Seoul. She asked, and Stephen, this may be a question for you, but others may know as well. Do you know of any NGOs working in developing countries and promoting plant-based diet and agriculture? Thought that was a very interesting question.
Not off the top of my head.
Okay, so maybe that's something that we could do a little research on and send with the replay, perhaps, to let people know what other things are happening. Okay, great. So Jim, this question came specifically to you. Rachel would like to hear you talk a little bit about something that you call locked brain syndrome, or LBS, and how we get minds unstuck about animal protein. She's obviously been reading your site. Do you have some thoughts on that you can share?
Well, as far as locked brain syndrome, LBS, it's basically what we've been talking about in this call today, the miracle of food to promote our own health, the miracle of food choices to slow, stop, or reverse climate change. And I think we're, so many of us, majority of our population is afflicted with that locked brain syndrome and is unable to grasp what we're talking about here. And it's really no fault of the average citizen. When you look at that group of the top environmental leaders in the world, I think most of them have locked brain syndrome. They don't talk about the fact that animal agriculture is the leading driver of climate change, and it's the only driver of climate change that could be it would be theoretically possible to totally eliminate animal agriculture in 5 years if the will were there all over the world. And that would probably do the trick in saving our civilization and saving our species and preventing the worst effects of climate change. But we are running out of time, and we've got to open the lock to the locked brain syndrome and start thinking about real simple stuff like, let's eat bananas and oatmeal instead of bacon and sausage. Real simple stuff.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
So someone, Daniel, actually asked if you would discuss the impacts of fish and chicken as opposed to beef, pork, and lamb, because I think there is a pervasive belief out there that those are somehow less environmentally damaging. Does anyone want to talk about that from any perspective? The impacts of fish and chicken, how they differ from beef, pork, and lamb as far as
I'd love to
impact.
you don't mind, I'd love to take a crack at that because I saw where that came from. I was certainly a student at the time. This is in the middle 1970s, when George McGovern had just, lost the election, came back. He headed up a committee at that time. That was the beginning of the dietary guidelines idea. He had a committee that first produced a report in 1976, arguing that, we're eating too much meat. He made a rather general statement and left it at that. It wasn't terribly well fleshed out, no pun intended. But in any case, he did that. His fellow senators, in turn, got angry with him. And of course, the industry did too, especially the beef industry. They came back and said, no, you can't do that. They forced him to go back to the table, produce a second report in 1977. That's what became the so-called dietary goals statement. And the compromise in that discussion at that time was that, okay, yeah, we'll go easy on the meat, because they were the big players in the room, the beef industry. But chicken and fish, they're not as bad. No basis for it really, but that's where it came from. And that allowed the 1977 document to come out. Even that led to 6 senators losing their elections in the 1980 elections because they got too close to talking about the livestock industry. So the chicken and fish story came out of that document, and it was circulated really widely. It's not as bad as white meat, it's this, it's that. When in reality, they all have protein. They do essentially the same thing. They increase cholesterol. They a lot of biochemistry stuff I can tell here. They basically do all the same thing. And that's a story on the fish and chicken has hung around ever since.
Yeah, that report, as I recall, focused on reducing saturated fat. And they said you could do that by, more poultry and fish and less beef and lamb, pork. So yeah, and then that started the fat-free, revolution, if you will, and then they supplemented that with lots of sugary stuff. So it was an unfortunate chain of events. Yeah.
Well, thank you for providing the historical perspective on that. That's very helpful. So here's a little bit different angle, and that is, this question is from Fred. For nearly 100 years, our government has provided incentives to both growers and animal agriculture. Is there a way to provide incentives to animal agriculture producers to produce less, look at alternatives, or exit animal agriculture altogether? We've been talking a lot about the government and what the government can do, but are there some things that, the growers themselves, the people in agriculture can do?
I would like to take that. I think, we're running out of time. We have an urgent situation here, and that's why I think the only way out of this is coming from the demand side of the equation. when every individual on this planet can choose what they want to eat, and if they can afford meat, they can make a whole lot of money eating plants because they'll be saving a lot of money. But we just have to educate the masses, and we have to change the demand. When we change the demand to plant-based foods, that's what will happen. And it will, I think, as it gathers steam, more internationally respected journalists start telling the whole story, the whole sordid story about how we've been misled by our schools of nutrition, by our industries producing all of these foods. It's just something we need to take to the people and work on the demand side of the equation. We don't have time to go into every aspect of the system that produces foods. I think we have to tell people the brilliance of T. Colin Campbell and Abraham Ort and Silas Rao, and then let the news media run with that. I think it's possible.
Stephen, you commented earlier about working with the farmers and growers. Do you have any comments in response to the question that Natasha just asked?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, any incentive structure could be established as long as there was that demand. And I think, there are some groups, there's a group that there's called Transformation. They're part of Mercy for Animals. And I really like the work they're doing. They're working directly with farmers to help them transition from mainly poultry production, as far as I know, into plant-based operations where they're working to, help create economic streams for farmers to make that transition. So I think that, work like that is really important into, driving this change. And I think that at the same time, it's going to start slowly. And I think that as momentum builds, hopefully we can see everything speed up and change at a quicker pace. So time will tell. So.
And I do know there's another, Rowdy Girl Sanctuary is another one that's working on the national level directly with farmers to help them make that transition as well. So I think that we are almost out of time here, but just as a reminder to everyone, and then Mike, I'll turn it back over to you. The replay of this session tonight will be available within a week, and we will send up a follow-up email and touch on a couple of these questions to provide additional resources in that follow-up email that contains the replay. So thanks so much for joining us, everyone, and I'll hand it back over to you, Mike.
Yeah, so big thanks to Colin, Jim, and Stephen to help us understand this timely and critical issue. We called it climate chaos because it's a lot of stuff going on out there, and so we look forward to revisiting this sometime in the future. And again, I thank our audience for tuning in tonight. And as Natasha said, it's going to be available on replay. So again, thanks to our panelists, and hope you all have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Thank you.